So hopefully from that previous video, you can see it's insanely quick to get going with just live streaming something out of Unreal. It's up to you then how you decide to control that camera and stuff like that. But a really popular way of getting a sequence rendered out is to actually use the Unreal Sequencer. I'm going to assume for now that you know how to use the Unreal Sequencer. So I'm going to jump in at a stage where you've already got a camera sequenced, but if you want a more in-depth tutorial on using that sequencer with the off-world live camera, that'll be later on in this playlist. But now I'm just going to show you how to get rendering out from Unreal Engine. So instead of using the spout to stream now, we're going to be using the movie render queue. This is sometimes a lot more stable for some people. It means you can reliably get no drops in frames, and you can just render out a sequence, a keyframe sequence, like camera sequence, exactly as you want. So with a sequence set up, this is how we then get rendering with the 360 camera. So let's check it out. Let's just actually make a render, I think. So it's just a good way, you know, once you start and you know you're rendering something out, you can then build up bits and pieces and just keep track of what you're adding to your renders. It's also just useful to show you the process for rendering with the 360 camera because it's an interesting process that uses the render target. And there's a couple ways around this. Yeah, I'll show you the HUD process to start with. You can do this through Composure as well because it's just using a texture target, but I'll show you HUD first. So first thing you want to do is go edit plugins and make sure movie render queue, enable this movie render queue, restart that. So we've enabled that plugin. We have the option between the old legacy version and the regular movie render queue. Use the regular. So when we're in here, we can create a config for our render settings. We've got the Al360 cam set up. Let's go to our settings, and what you want to do is add UI renderer. So that's like our HUD. Our HUD will be playing over the top of everything, compositing the UI onto the final image. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a UI that is literally just this, what the camera is seeing, and we're going to overlay it over everything. Okay, so we've got our live stream wizard folder. From this, I'm going to create a material. Call this 360 output material. That's fine. And then in this material, we want to double click it and click on this bit. Turn it into a user interface material in the domain. User interface. We need to reconnect this, save and apply that. Now, next thing we want to create here is a editor utility widget. So editor utilities, editor utility widget, and we'll rename this one 360 render widget. Yep, and double click that one to bring up the HUD widget editor. So I've got the 360 render widget selected. So in this widget, we're going to delete the canvas panel, click on the render widget, or whatever you've called your widget, it should be at the top of the hierarchy. Drag an image underneath. We got that there. Now in the details of this image, under brush, we can select this 360 output material. So now this is going to be overlaid over the screen, basically. Compile and save that. And back here, should look like this, your widget. So now we just need to set this in the level blueprint to overlay over the screen on begin play. So because we already have this, we can create a sequence. Don't worry if you don't already have this, create level sequence player and this play looping. This is from a later video where we go into making the sequence play on begin play. You don't need this sequence either. You can just do the rest out of event begin play if you don't already have these two nodes in your blueprint. And we'll make it do the widget first and then the player. Go create widget, and this can be the 360 render widget. And we just want to go add to viewport, simple as. I'll put the blue in the blue. Compile save. And that is pretty much all the setup we need.
It makes really fast.
So back here, if we go back to our sequences, 360 render sequence, and bring that up. Make sure we got the movie render queue set over the legacy. We can go into our config, make sure we got that UI renderer set. We can go setting. In our render settings here, we can go settings and select UI renderer. And this UI renderer is that widget that we just made. And make sure that composite onto final image is selected. And with that, we will have our 360 image overlaid over our render. One thing to double check is your path output directory, where you want to save it to, and your resolution. A couple of these other optimizations we can go into later on, but you might notice here our stream resolution is 1440. So we want to make sure these resolutions match up. And for now, I'm just going to save this preset, save as. Let's save it in our sequences folder, 𝘽𝙊360 config. And yeah, so our stream resolution is actually at 1440. I think that's 1440 by 1920, but I need to double check. I always forget this. Just type in like 1440p resolution, and it is in fact 2560 by 1440. So we got that set. We can look at frame rate, custom frame rate, and things like that. And if our PC is underclocked and stuff like that, we shouldn't really need to worry about a crash. Make sure pause rendering is unchecked, and that's all. You're good to go. So at the moment this is going to go out as a JPEG sequence, but we can composite that later. So just go accept, let that render. Go render local, and we'll see how long that takes to do 302 frames. And if we check our directory now, we can see that we are getting 360 output as JPEGs, and it's rendering really fast. Even at a scene where there'd be more evidence of ray tracing and things like that, this is rendering so much quicker than other 360 options. Getting super quick renders out of this. Yeah, pretty impressive stuff. So I'll really quickly show you the process for sequencing these images. So you're going to highlight all that you'd like to sequence, drag them in, right click new comp from selection, set that still duration to 0.01. So that's one frame per still. Use the dimensions from this. Single composition, we can add it straight to render queue if we like, and sequence layers, make sure that's checked with no overlap. Now we go down here, and sometimes it messes up the order a tiny bit. So if we expand this a bit, we can see started at 151, strangely. We want to start at 0, please. Select all of these, move them right to the beginning. Then select the remainder, zoom in, move that right to the end. Strange thing that sometimes happens, I don't know if it's naming conventions or something like that, but it should follow on fine. And you know, we've now got a nice 360 sequence, no loss of frames, looking really good, and we can already kind of experience the 360. If you just zoom in a little bit, that's essentially what equirectangular is doing. It's taking this image. Once you zoom in, it starts to look like you're kind of stood there. So yeah, you can kind of see the effect already. Yeah, I think that's enough to cover for this whole sequencing and rendering. We've now got our sequence going, rendered out a low quality pass. We could then up the quality if we are happy with that, and hopefully you're getting no crashes so far. So now let's just look at making this scene way more fancy, way more interesting. I'm hoping we find some errors along the way, because then I can help you fix them. If I'm not finding errors, then there's not much help. But I do have some ideas. For getting better FPS and better frames. So yeah, way more optimizations, way more tips to come. And yeah, I hope this is helpful so far. Hope you can get some 360 scenes going. Cheers.
You're jamming with the hottest disc jockey.